Walrus, a giant creature with curved tusks and a thick layer of fat that protects its body from the cold. When the spear is launched, the is brought onto the boat in a misty cold smoke. An ancient ritual of the Arctic people, where courage and survival instinct blend with the power of the ocean. In the middle of the icy wilderness of the Arctic, where the wind howls like knives and the cold sea is covered with icebergs, indigenous hunters begin their journey to hunt giant walruses, a sea creature with a massive body, thick skin and long, white curved tusks, hunting oars wrapped in sealskin to prevent slipping, and large spears made of hard wood with hand-forged iron tips. Tied tightly with thick ropes, they weaved through the drifting ice, searching for herds of walruses sunning themselves on. Giant walrus weakened, breathing heavily, and finally sank into the cold water. They quickly dragged its body closer to shore, anchored it next to a large ice floe, and prepared to cut the meat. The walrus skin is nearly 10 centimeters thick. The white fat layer inside is thick. Each knife cut must be decisive and precise to be able to cut. They use large, sharp knives, carefully peeling off each heavy piece of skin, revealing a mass of golden fat underneath, which is cut separately to be used as fuel or processed into food. The walrus meat is dark red, firm, and has a strong fishy smell, divided into large pieces and then dried or smoked to preserve for a long time in freezing conditions. The long, curved tusks are carefully sawed off the head, cleaned and brought back to the village to be made into jewelry, sculptures, or exchanged for precious goods. The giant skin is stretched, scraped clean, then dried into a durable material used to make clothes, shoes or cover boats. The work of cutting the meat lasts for many hours, soaked in sweat despite the temperature being tens of degrees below zero. Everyone clearly understands the importance of every part of the walrus's body. Nothing is wasted. Everything is fully utilized. As the sun set, they gathered meat, fat, and skin onto their boats, leaving a red trail on the ice that blended into the cold sunset. The hunt was over, and they returned to their village amid the howling wind, carrying with them a huge booty that would sustain the entire community through the harsh winter. This was not only the journey of the hunters, but also a testament to the strength, courage, and the strong bond between humans and the wild nature of the land of eternal ice and snow. After bringing the giant walrus carcass back to shore, the work of dividing and processing began in the bitter cold. Villagers gathered around the butchering area, each group taking on different parts. Strong men were in charge of cutting the body, using large knives to make deep cuts along the spine to separate thick pieces of meat. Each cut when boiled, the walrus fat would produce a thick, pungent-smelling oil, but it was also a valuable source of energy, used to light and keep warm during the long winter. In another corner, young men used hammers and axes to split the giant head. They had to work very skillfully to get the pair of long, white tusks intact, a symbol of strength and status in the community. After being cleaned and polished, the walrus tusks are used to depict traditional patterns, hunting scenes, or to carve into solemn ceremonial objects. Meanwhile, the dark red meat is divided into large pieces, some of which are cooked on the spot. The rich aroma of the meat spreads throughout the village. For them, walrus meat is not only food, but also pride, the result of courage and solidarity. Each child runs around, watching their parents work with eager eyes, knowing that today's hunt will ensure food and clothing for the whole village for many months. The thick, armor-like skin is stretched out. The remaining fat is scraped off, and then dried on wooden racks. Once dry, it will be cut and sewn with animal tendons to make coats, boats, or windproof covers. Each step is carefully performed, carrying skills passed down from generation to generation. As night fell and snow began to fall, the whole village gathered around the brightly burning barrels of walrus oil, warming themselves and recounting the arduous hunt. The sound of knives hitting bones, the sound of boiling oil, laughter and the wind blowing through the small village created a scene typical of Arctic life. Walruses, powerful creatures of the icy ocean, have become an indispensable part of the culture and survival of the people here. The hunt only happens a few times a year, and each time has a sacred meaning. They do not hunt to destroy, but to maintain the balance between humans and nature, between poverty and abundance, between life and death in the coldest and harshest land on the planet after all the meat and fat have been processed. The next step is to preserve and store for the long winter ahead. Large chunks of meat are washed with cold seawater, then cut into thick strips and hung on tall wooden frames to dry in the natural Arctic wind. The cold and dry wind prevents the meat from rotting and turns it into a firm, dry form that can be kept for months. Some other parts of the meat are heavily salted, then placed in wooden barrels or stone jars, covered with a layer of fat to prevent air from entering. This is a traditional method of preservation that people in the Arctic region have used for many generations. When winter comes, they only need to cut each piece of dried meat to cook soup, grill or eat with seaweed to have enough energy to fight the harsh cold. The walrus fat, after being melted, is poured into leather bottles or sealed wooden barrels. This oil is not only used to light up the dark nights that last for many months, but is also rubbed on the skin to protect against the cold and keep the body warm when hunting at sea. Allowed to take what they really needed, and that they must always respect the sacrificed creatures. The sound of stone drums echoed in the night. Mixed with the howling wind and the smell of oil smoke spreading throughout the village, creating a sacred atmosphere in the middle of the vast white snow. The story of the giant walrus hunt not only talks about ingenuity and bravery, but also a profound lesson about the harmony between humans and nature. Because in this harsh land, life only exists when people know how to share, respect and be grateful for what the ocean gives. As winter gradually approaches, snow begins to fall heavily. The sea is covered with white ice patches, and the sun only appears for a few hours a day. Then what is harvested from the giant walrus becomes the most precious source of life for the whole community. In each small house covered with skin and bones, walrus meat is hung along the wall. Smoke from the charcoal stove spreads everywhere to help heat it over the fire, dip it in sea salt, and share it as a ritual of hospitality. Village children would gather around the drying pelts, playing and laughing in the cold, while the adults continued to mend boats, sharpen knives, and prepare for the next hunt. Experienced men would sit around the fire and recount their hunts, how they chased the giant walrus through the icy waves, how the ropes strained in the cold wind, and the moment the giant beast collapsed after a long fight. Each account inspired pride, for to them, bringing down a walrus was a demonstration of strength, skill, and courage, which could mean the difference between life and death in this land. When the strong wind blows through the village, the skins stretched outdoors squeak, the sound blending with the distant waves like a traditional Arctic song, reminding everyone that the ocean is always there, full of danger but also full of grace. The next walrus hunting season will come when the ice melts, and once again, the men will board their boats. Carrying spears, ropes and faith, and set out into the vast expanse of ice and snow. This cycle repeats itself for hundreds of years, maintaining the life, culture and spirit of the people of the Arctic. The story of the walrus is not only a story of survival, but also a symbol of resilience, of the deep connection between humans and harsh nature. Although the world out there has changed, although technology has become more and more modern, for them, the walrus hunt still has a sacred value. As a ritual of national existence, where humans not only conquer nature, but also learn to respect and blend into the breath of this cold land and sky as winter entered its coldest phase. The entire village seemed to be covered in a giant blanket of ice. Outside, the wind howled in gusts, carrying a bitter cold, and the snow lay so thick that the paths faded into white. But inside each hut, the pale yellow light of walrus oil lamps still flickered, warming the small but lively space. The walrus oil burned steadily, emitting a soft light, enough for the mother to sit and sew walrus skin clothes, the father to sharpen his knife, and the children to play nearby. The smell of smoke and dried meat hung in the air, rich, familiar, and cozy. Occasionally, a group of hunters would gather on the ice field, checking their tools, preparing for the new hunting season when the ice began to melt. They maintained their ropes, re-tipped their spears, and told each other stories of the distant seas where walruses often congregated. Everyone knew that the next hunt would not be easy, but it would also be a source of pride for the whole village. For no one born here had not dedicated their lives to the sea and ice. During the freezing months, walrus meat became the main food in every meal. They cooked walrus soup with dried seaweed, or grilled the meat over charcoal, and ate it with Arctic moss to supplement vitamins. Children were fed the soft fat because it was rich in energy, helping them resist the cold. Every piece of meat, every drop of oil carried the flavor of the ocean and human sweat. Occasionally, the village chiefs gathered, lit oil lamps, talked about the old years, and recalled the names of hunters who had fallen because of blizzards or walrus counterattacks. They believed that their souls would blend into the ocean, guiding them to safe hunting trips. Outside, the snow was still falling, the moonlight glittering on the ice like thousands of reflective mirrors. The scene made everyone feel small before nature, but at the same time filled with pride for still standing firm in this seemingly uninhabitable land. When spring came, the sea surface gradually cracked. Each piece of ice separated from each other, which was also a signal for a new cycle. The waves begin to roar after months of silence. Migratory birds return, and the men look out to sea with determination. The hunt for the giant walrus will begin again, a ritual that has lasted for generations, where humans continue to test their limits. Face the fierce nature, and reaffirm the eternal bond between humans and the majestic Arctic ice. When the last icebergs melt, the Arctic Sea opens up again, a vast space, cold grey and eerily silent. The leather boats are pulled down to the water. Ropes, iron spears, and scalpels are carefully prepared. Everything is ready for a new hunting season. The men tie their leather jackets tightly around their bodies, carry spears and lances. Their eyes are steadfast. No one speaks much, just silently looks out into the distance, where the pale horizon merges into the sea. They understand that each trip is a gamble between life and death. But no one backs down. As the fleet sailed out to sea, the sound of oars mixed with the cold wind, creating a familiar rhythm like an ancient song their ancestors had sung. They followed the faint waves, the patches of ice where the walruses often came to rest. The giant walruses lay close together on the ice, their huge bodies, their rough skin shining under the cold sun. Each hunter had to choose the right moment, when the leader was not alert, to be able to approach without scaring the whole herd. A decisive shout rang out. The spears flew through the air, deeply embedded in the beast's body. It roared loudly across the sea, then rose up madly, hitting the water hard, creating white foam. The small boats immediately scattered. The men holding the ropes tightened. Each strong wave tossed the boat. Sweat rolled down the man's strong face despite the cold. They strained to pull, persistently holding the rope until the giant beast was exhausted. Once again, the red blood stained the white ice, creating a scene both majestic and fierce. When the walrus stopped breathing, they brought its body onto the boat, breathing a sigh of relief. Everyone was exhausted, but their eyes sparkled with pride. They knew this animal would feed the village for another season. On the way back, the wind carried the salty smell of the sea. The seagulls cried loudly. And on the ice floes in the distance, the sunlight reflected off the snow like silver. The hunt was over, but its traces would remain in memory: the whistling of the wind, the piercing sound of the spear, the roar of the sea, and the heartbeat of the people all fused into one. When they reached the shore, the whole village rushed out to greet them, cheers echoing in the cold wind. Children jumped. The elderly smiled kindly. The harsh life in this polar region always revolves around such hunting trips. And it is these encounters with nature that have forged the steely spirit of the people here, the children of ice and sea. Living with walruses, fighting blizzards, and writing the story of survival in the coldest land on the planet. When the boats returned, the coastal village suddenly burst into life after months of silence in the cold wind. Cheers rang out, children ran after the boats. The elderly stepped out of their tents. Their eyes lit up with pride as they saw the giant block of meat covered in ice being pulled ashore. The women quickly prepared knives, cutting boards, buckets of cold seawater and thick leather to spread on the ice. Ready to cut the meat. The atmosphere on the shore became unusually bustling. Amid the hazy cold air, the smell of blood and salt mixed together into a familiar flavor of life in the far north. The leading hunter stepped down, his face darkened by wind and snow, his hands full of lacerations from the tow rope, but his eyes lit up with joy of victory. The giant walrus lay motionless, its thick skin glistening in the dim sunlight, its wounds still oozing crimson blood. They begin the Thanksgiving ritual before butchering, placing their hands on the animal's chest, bowing their heads silently, praying to the spirit of the sea for giving him this prey. For them, each hunted creature is not only a source of life, but also a sacred part of nature, worthy of respect. Then the sound of knives rings out regularly. Each cut opens up thick layers of meat, steaming hot in the sub-zero cold. The head butcher uses a large knife to cut along the body, separating the skin from the carpet-like layer of white fat. The fat is collected and put into a vat to cook oil, while the skin is cut into large pieces, dried separately to make clothes or boat roofs. The dark red meat is divided equally among each family in the village. The best part is usually kept for the celebration of a successful hunt that evening. The feast is the most important moment. People gather around the fire, eat grilled walrus meat, drink herbal oil, sing traditional songs about previous generations of hunters. The sound of leather drums echoed across the ice, mingling with laughter, songs, and the gentle lapping of the waves, creating a strange harmony between man and nature.